Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Lower Makefield Township Board of Supervisors meeting, May 3rd, 2023. Call to order, and let's rise to recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll. Supervisor Lewis.
Present.
Supervisor Blundy.
Here.
Supervisor McCartney.
Present.
Supervisor Grenier.
Here.
I am here. We have a quorum. And we will go to item 4, community announcements. Is there anybody in the audience or online that has an announcement for the community? Hearing none, I will recite what I have. The Historical Commission is planning a community cleanup day at Slate Hill Cemetery on May 6th at 9 a.m. Slate Hill is located at 2308 Yardley Morrisville Road. Cleanup is focused on branches and leaves, and it's part of the eventual plan to clean the grave markers. Yardley Makefield VFW Post 6393 and American Legion Knowles Doyle Post 317 will be leading their annual Memorial Day observance and parade on Monday, May 29th. The morning observance begins at 9 a.m. at the Delaware Avenue Monument. The Main Street Parade begins at 11 a.m. As usual, the parade will muster on Maple Vale Drive and proceed down Main Street. Its conclusion at the American Legion Post. We'll go to item 5.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the minutes for April 19th, 2023.
Second.
Motion made by Supervisor Lewis, seconded by Supervisor Grenier to approve the minutes. Any discussion? Any public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it 5-0. Item 6, presentation from PNC. I see they're up front. Take a seat. You can grab another one that all 3 of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to thank you all for having us.
Is that on?
Is it? Yeah. Is that better? I should know how to use these things by now. Anyway, my name is Joseph Miskell. I'm a local resident. I'm a Senior Vice President, Managing Director for PNC Institutional Asset Management. Brought along our Senior Investment Advisor, Adam Levine, as well as Brian Appleby. And we are very thankful to be awarded your business recently, and markets have been very volatile. We're going to talk a little bit about that and lay out what our plan is to invest your money, and we encourage questions if you do have any. And again, I thank you for your time.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joe. Good evening. Thanks for having us. Wanted to get in front of the board. Money's moved in early March. Sitting in cash right now, making almost 4.5 or 5%, risk-free, no volatility. So it's been good to park the money there. But as we want to enter the markets, we wanted to outline the market backdrop and our investment methodology, not so much for permission, but rather collaborative discussion around our thoughts and observations and what we're thinking. What we're thinking is the markets are pretty volatile. Fed raised rates again today, 5 to 5.25 on cash. Inflation is really the big issue here. Of course, there's a lot going on from banks, from interest rates, you name it. So what I've laid out is to talk about the current capital markets for a few minutes, talk about the initial investment portfolio that we're going to start building out a position on over the next 13 weeks, and then just give you a sense of what that methodology looks like. Please stop me, ask any and all questions. Again, we want to do this to make sure that we're collaborative and we're communicating and that everyone understands what the initial plan is.
Quick questions, if you don't mind, just about what we're doing. Are you going to be putting anything on the screen so our residents can see, or is this just a conversation?
Yeah, I had sent an electronic copy. I don't know, Dave.
It was provided to Mr. Keller. I don't know if the gentleman that's in the back has access to that presentation at this point.
I've just been sitting in the crowd before during these
Sure,
presentations.
sure.
Sorry, trying to figure out what we're doing. Awesome,
Okay.
thank you.
Good.
It'll be page 4. You're welcome. Thank you. Glad we had it in electronic version. So the long and the short is growth is slowing. We look at things through the business cycle. We think we're in the slowing expansion phase of the business cycle. GDP, first quarter GDP came out last week, up 1.1%. So we're not really technically starting a potential recession yet, but growth is absolutely slowing. Higher rates certainly starting to take a bite out of inflation, taking a bite out of growth. You think about what's going to go on now with credit and lending and banks, that's going to further tighten without the Fed having to tighten. So conditions are going to get a little bit tougher for businesses and for individuals. PNC has a likelihood of recession over the next 12 months at about 65%. Our base case for recession is about mild. We'll talk about what it could be if it was a really bad recession. And where we sit right now, the S&P 500 trading at about an 18 times forward multiple. It's pretty expensive. So we want to be cognitive of where we enter the markets with these new assets that you guys have come into, because we want to be careful stewards of it. When we think about unemployment, we ended the year 2020 at 3.6%. Unemployment's going to rise at the end of 2023 up to an estimated 3.8%, up to 4.9%. And this is something, unfortunately, that the Fed is willing to do to cool off the market and inflation. So that gives a backdrop around employment. Earnings estimates are clearly coming down. Fourth quarter earnings growth of S&P 500 companies were down 4.7%. I'm just talking off the cuff right now. Earnings growth is trending to be about -5% in this quarter. So we are technically going to enter earnings growth recession or an earnings recession in the S&P in the US. That has always led to a recession. So we can talk about inverted yield curves. We can talk about all different metrics. But at the end of the day, when companies aren't growing their earnings, that is the precursor towards recession. So we want to be careful with the money. If we turn to page 5, I'm just going to focus on the bad. The ugly is Joe. I mean,
Thank you.
good is Brian, but the bad is really what's the headwind here. High inflation, global monetary policy tightening, right? So quantitative tightening. Central banks are reducing the amount of what they're doing with their balance sheet. Financial stress and credit. I think everyone understands that. European protests, inverted yield curve, weakening economic indicators. It goes on and on and on. Low commercial real estate under pressure. I mean, I think we can all say commercial real estate is at a precipice of a change. You can see that it's being repurposed through cities throughout the United States where commercial real estate is moving towards apartments, housing, different repurposing. How you guys will get to come to know us as we manage money through the business cycle. Where are we on page 6? I mentioned we're into slowing expansion, part of the business cycle.
Page 6.
Page 6. Please.
There it is.
Thank you. So again, standard business cycle, recovery, accelerated expansion, slowing expansion, contraction, recession. We think we're right at the slowing expansion. If you look at what that quintessentially means, unemployment's falling, wages are rising, conditions are less accommodative, credit's tightening. I mean, it's quintessential that we're at the end of the expansion phase. So we think we tip into contraction or the recession period, second half of 2023, early 2024. And then the path forward really is about companies figuring out how to be more efficient with margins. Maybe the Fed cuts rates. Right now, Chairman Powell came out today and said after he's raised rates, I ain't cutting rates, guys. So just don't even think that that's going to be the tailwind to support your market, right? Because they don't want inflation to rear its head again, like we learned in the 70s, where they cut rates, inflation came back, they raised rate, they cut rates, they raised rates, they cut rates, and lo and behold, inflation was 18%. And we had to squash it out with Reaganomics. So that's not a mistake that's going to occur again. Page 7 just gives you a sense of our overview of the markets. I'm not going to read it, but it's there for the board's consideration. Page 8 is really where I want to focus on the next couple of slides. Our base case is a mild recession, right? So if the Fed continues to raise rates, and then there's a pause, geopolitical concerns, Russia, Ukraine war lingers on, but doesn't materially disrupt the commodities market again the way it did last summer. And again, I'm just humbled that we're standing here talking about a ground war in Europe in the year 2023. It's just amazing to me. Earnings growth, I mentioned, normally falls about 10% as we go into a contraction period. It's only down about 5% right now. So we think another 4% in this quarter. If that is our case, forward P on the S&P is 14 or 15 times forward earnings. Well, we're at 18 right now. So we are expecting the market to pull back at some level. That doesn't mean there's not money to be made in a stock pick or in a sector selection perspective. But for just to buy the broad market is something we're not going to do here, given where we're at from an inflection point. God forbid we go into a bear case, stagflation, central banks over tighten. The good news is Chairman Powell today said they're probably done now for a little while in raising rates. They're going to wait and see, but they're going to keep rates high. They're going to keep interest rates elevated. Well, that's good for us as depositors, for senior citizens, for people that are required or leaning on income. But if we do get a bear case, a deep and long recession, earnings growth can fall to 11 or 13 times. Then we're talking about a significant pullback in the markets. We're talking about the unwinding of the wealth effect. We're talking about stagnant years of wages, of earnings, of savings. And then the bull case, the good case is, well, we engineer this no landing. There's not a soft landing. There's not a hard landing. It's just, we can just move forward. And then we can support the current level of the S&P 500. I think that's highly unlikely, but I think that does exist, the Goldilocks scenario. But again, we just wanted to lay out our thoughts. We move forward. Global banks' balance sheets, everybody knows what happened coming out of Lehman, what happened coming out of COVID, how quickly central banks acted to buy securities. They were starting to let these securities roll off their balance sheets, so quantitative tightening, while interest rates were moving higher. So it's like a double tsunami storm, again, affecting the markets. When we look at GDP growth, we spoke about on the page 10, top right, that's coming down. Consensus US GDP is moderating. So from a growth perspective, markets are slowing. Sentiment on page 11 is weak. And then our great country is built on small businesses, right? 70% of US GDP is the consumer. 80 or 85% of our business or of our country is on small businesses. Small business outlook is pretty dim. So when we think about layoffs, it's not just in big tech that's going on or Wall Street. It's going to start affecting Main Street as well, these layoffs, as I outlined. You're never going to hear me or Brian or Joe say, don't be invested in the market. We are long-term investors. We believe in staying invested. We just believe entry points matter. So on page 12, gives you a sense of how the S&P 500 has ascended over time. You can see dips and starts. I would point out, you look at the great financial crisis of Lehman and what went on there, and that was resi mortgages. But look at the recovery. They call that a V-shaped recovery. Why? Because central banks pumped liquidity into the market. Similar story in COVID, but look at how shallow that was for 3 months. And then the Fed was very swift to come in and prop up markets, right? There were stimulus checks, the money supply increased, all perfect storms towards inflation. So that's kind of how we got here and where we're at. So that's our thoughts around the markets and why we want to be careful and conscious of how we're going to invest the money. So it's not a great backdrop. It's not a terrible backdrop. 5% on your cash. Bonds have an interesting yield now of 5 or 6%, investment grade corporates. We wouldn't speculate into below investment grade here. And we'll talk now about portfolio positioning and the underlying asset classes. Any questions or thoughts? I know I'm covering a lot pretty quickly. Okay? Great. Page 15 is our initial portfolio recommendation. It's similar to what we spoke about a couple of months ago. It has a large weighting to the U.S. market. U.S. equity is 45%. International equity is 22%, 33% to fixed income. We have used passive vehicles, ETFs, low-cost mutual funds where we can, as the board has requested to have a low-cost implementation. From a fixed income perspective, we're going to pay a little bit higher for mutual funds in that space right now because we know that there's yield to be gotten, but security selection and fixed income probably matters more than sector selection and equity. We'll take the beta, what the markets will give us in the equity world, and then we'll be active in fixed income. This portfolio on a projected forward basis, expected to return about 6.8% over a 10-year period, yield of about 2.5%, and the manager costs are 14 basis points, less than 1/5 of 1%. So again, we like it, well diversification, high credit quality, passive in the equity space, active in fixed income. How are we going to get you invested on page 15? We're going to dollar cost average across all asset classes over the next 13 weeks. There's a high credit quality bias within the portfolio. So we're going to focus on companies that have return on invested capital, free cash flow, real earnings. We're not going to be invested in companies in a garage in San Francisco. So we're going to have a higher credit quality bias. In fixed income, I mentioned we're going to be active. We're going to pay up a little bit for active management. But at the end of the day, the board should know how we're going to invest in this credit cycle is the portfolio where the fixed income aspect is going to be AA+. We're going to derive almost a yield of 5%. An effective duration, this is interest rate sensitivity of 5.4 years. So we're still shorter than the intermediate market, but we have a yield preferential, and we have a high credit quality bias. We're going to Brian and I are going to trade opportunistically, taking advantage of market entry and exit points. As markets sell off, we're going to buy on some days, and the markets rally, we're going to leave it alone, right? So we're going to eventually get to the portfolio's ending target allocation of 67% equity, 28% bonds, and 5% cash. Cash is a strategic allocation right now, given its 5% yield, but you can expect us to use that cash as opportunities come available in the market over the coming cycle. With that, that's really what we wanted to present this evening. Wanted to just give an outline, come in, say hello, open the dialogue. We're always available. Is there anything I might have missed? Questions, thoughts, considerations, concerns? If it's a good question. I'm kidding. Yeah, of course.
I have two questions.
Before we start with public comment, let me just make sure that none of the
Right.
board, that's okay. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it. Any member of the board have any questions?
That's good. Looking at, diversification is good, obviously, unless you're too diversified sometimes. I'm just looking at the different ETFs and funds that we're looking at here. Have you done any analysis to see sometimes with some of these funds, they still have large shares of the same stocks or same whatever? Have you done an analysis to see how much, we don't have too much Apple, for example, compared to something else?
Covariance, right? It's covariance overlap. Yeah, no, we look at it. There's going to be an overweight to tech because of what a large magnitude it is in the benchmark. What we've done is, if we go to the slide where we show the portfolio, it's a good question. Go back, please, a couple slides. Yep, that slide of the portfolio 15. What you'll see is, I don't know if I should walk away and point to the TV. 1, 2, 3. The third line item from the top, MSCI US quality. So these are sectors that are not technology. Think about John Deere, Honeywell, consumer staples, industrials, to try and counterbalance the technology and the growth overweight.
Okay. And then when you look at your portfolios, do you look to give it an ESG score as well, or something similar?
We haven't looked at ESG within this portfolio. We can. There's something we have tremendous capability within asset management to do that. We started out from a total return perspective, not from an ESG perspective. But if that's something that the board wants to ratify over time, we can look at that.
Mine isn't necessarily an ESG driven investment strategy. It's more to make sure that we identify any potential investments that might not be in line with what the community would be looking for, like say, example, investments in Russia.
Yeah, so in the investment policy statement that's in the back of the book, worked with David about with legal about making sure that your prohibited securities are reflected in the investment policy statement, and then that is effectuated in the portfolio.
Any other comments by the board, questions?
Yeah, have you guys given some thought to the value of the dollar versus other currencies to see what your thoughts are on that related to what I am hoping for is a gentle landing? Love my man Jay Powell. We're tight. Love him. Please hit that. But that and then the sort of reduction of quantitative easing over time. So can we do, how do those two things impact what your scenarios are in terms of, where we think we are?
Let me take the dollar first. Dollar's going to get volatile as we move into the debt ceiling
Yeah.
debate. After that, I think I can't envision a scenario where the U.S. defaults. I can't envision a scenario where we're downgraded again. I believe the U.S. will remain the currency, the reserve currency of the world. How the dollar will trade will depend on a lot of different factors. So it's hard for me to predict how the dollar will be.
Yeah, I just think of that in terms of inflation because, if we have a strong dollar, imports become cheaper, exports become harder, which becomes part of the,
Spiral.
tightening. Yeah, as it were. So that's something I'm thinking about. And for those who are curious, and I just did a quick look, the 4 largest tech companies represent about 21% of the S&P 500. So that's a problem in general in the economy, that those companies have too high a market share. One of the Meta has obviously took a horrible fall last year, but is now coming back dramatically because its PEs were like a steel companies, like 6 or over the 7 or 8. Now they've come back. So I guess in general that we're not going to be able to easily avoid. And I'm not sure necessarily you'd want to on that.
What I want to, you're not going to be able to avoid it necessarily. I mean,
Yeah.
it's too prevalent. Even in the qual, Apple's a top 5 holding. Like there's no way around it from a market cap perspective, from an exposure perspective, right?
Yeah, Apple, Meta, Microsoft. You're absolutely right. I mean, they've definitely had a quick rebound in the first quarter of this year. And there hasn't been a lot of breadth in the market, I would say, in the first quarter. And the Apples, the Googles, Alphabet, however you want to phrase it, they have really driven the performance in the first quarter. But portfolio is, diversified. It's diversified across value, core, and growth. So we're not always going to be focused on these technology companies. There is allocations to energy companies. So like value stocks, things like that we'll see in the portfolio. Home Depot is the biggest holding in the quality, which is what Adam was talking to earlier, whereas we do want to have a quality bias in the portfolio because when we think about the contraction in the business cycle, companies that have, really strong balance sheets, that have strong cash flows, those are the kind of names that we want to get into the portfolio. So we do try to balance out some of the risk inherent in the portfolio, but we are diversified and they're very broad-based indices, passively managed funds. So we do try to spread the risk out. So it's not like it's an active fund where there's a manager who's doubling up on Apple. It's really just taking the market caps, and that's how these indices that's how these funds are designed. They're market cap weighted.
And I would add on to your question around technology, they've done very well this year, right? Because there was a belief these are long durated assets. Rates were going to fall. It was a tailwind to tech. But tech's also gone through some significant layoffs. So Meta is ascending because Wall Street loves their margins. Well, their margins are happening because of the numerator denominator scenario with, employment and wages. We are always going to have an exposure to growth. We're going to have exposure to the larger holdings within sectors, and then we're going to actively manage around that to make sure it's not a covariant risk. Daniel, to your question.
Before I yield back to balance my time, I will say something that's probably going to get me in trouble, but I was rooting for you to get First Republic. I say that for a couple of reasons. I want a strong, diverse banking industry. Full disclosure, I have worked for a regional bank and JP Morgan Chase and am a customer of that bank. However, what we're seeing and what's happened in this most recent financial, not a meltdown, right? We lose banks. We've had bank failures for years. Is that the innovative part, the part that funds entrepreneurs is now going to get thrown under the, basically the bureaucracy. And I don't know if that's a good thing for banking policy, but that's separate from our discussion today. So just know that I was rooting for you. Sorry it didn't go your way.
We will be a net buyer. There's no doubt PNC is the 5th or 6th largest bank in the country. We're very conservative. At the end of the day, I think we will grow. There's going to be more consolidation. Silicon Valley Bank, that was Finance 101 and how to manage a balance sheet and what you were doing with treasuries. But the run on the banks was real. Deposits matter. But to your point, funding around VC, around ideas, innovation. No, this is going to affect our growth, not just for this year or next year. It's going to tighten significantly.
Yeah, and you guys even might be too big. I don't want to get in trouble I'll get in trouble across the board. But yeah, no, I agree. That's a headwind I think we're going to see 2-3 years from now. And we need more banks in the 75 to 200 billion range, big enough to have scale, but not too big to be slow.
Yep.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see. TBD.
Any other comments from the board or questions? Hearing none, I'll open up to public comment. So this is it's a formal business meeting, so can you rise?
Yeah, I'll do.
Mr. Levine. Just come to the
Come to the
podium,
microphone.
your name, address for the record, just for the Lower Mayfield residents.
Larry Borda, 508 Heritage Oak Drive. 2 questions. Number one, I think you already answered it partially on the bank side, but does PNC do an independent analysis in terms of what they're expecting based on whether or not they're going to see significant regional bank failures? That's not factored specifically. Okay.
We're looking based on what economists expect that asset class to return over a 10-year basis.
Okay.
It will eventually become an.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Levine. I need the microphone.
No, not specifically for that, sir.
Okay. The other
It will eventually
question.
become an input over time.
Okay. The other question I had was, at least to a typical consumer, I think a 60-40 ratio of equities to non-equities is considered moderate growth. And you're running 67-33. So what's the potential for, well, first of all, what would be the difference in the expected income in a 60-40 portfolio versus what you're calling for? And then what's the increased risk or a downside under your proposal versus a 60-40?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, the 60-40 versus 67-33, but yeah, Brian.
Brian, if you could just take the mic.
Sorry, I'm just getting used to it. So on slide 15, if you look at our portfolio projections, they're based on our capital market assumptions. They're all outlined in the appendix, so you can see how the methodology, our assumptions, what they actually are. We can follow up. I mean, if that's something the board would like, we have to run these through simulations. It's not something Adam and I can sit here and do on our calculators.
I'm just curious because as somebody who's getting older, I'm not going to say older, but as somebody who's getting older, I'm fairly conservative in my investing, and I'm assuming the township wants to do the same. My understanding is that 60-40 is a pretty good balance. I was just curious as to how you go to a higher ratio and then what that means.
What I would add with respect, prior to yields moving as high as they've moved, there's a lot of empirical evidence and research that shows 60-40 at the end of 2022 was not going to get you where you wanted to be from a inflation adjusted perspective because yields were so low. So that was part of the input of 67-33. And then the higher credit quality bias within fixed income with a yield preferential was cognizantly built without taking on undue credit risk in the high yield market or the emerging market debt market or the synthetic loan market or the CDO market. So again, these are straightforward investment grade fixed income with a small smattering of below investment grade. So it's a high credit quality portfolio. I would anticipate respectfully that the difference between 67-33 and 60-40 will be de minimis. But we can certainly run the numbers and come back to the board if that's warranted.
And the other question is, I forget which slide it was. It might have been 7. You show a standard deviation. What does that represent?
It's the volatility of returns around the benchmark.
Do you know what that is on a 60-40 equation?
Yeah.
Okay.
It would be all, it's, you know, we have these models. We have really smart people that support us, right? It's me and Adam and Joe is our market director, but we work with our investment office. And then within our investment office, we have researchers, we have strategists, we have actuaries, and they help us.
Don't forget economists.
Economists. So runs the gamut. It's our investment office. They help us develop the capital market assumptions. So we can run any kind of analysis, almost like an asset liability study.
You're not going to see that much of a difference in the standard deviation.
But you won't.
What Mr. Boyer brings up, and it gives me a question in my head. We can predict or we can guesstimate what the markets are going to be, but if we see significant shifts in what's going to happen, PNC has the flexibility to reallocate funds to mitigate our risks.
Absolutely.
It's important to for everybody to
And
understand.
again, I think that goes back to the investment policy statement and what the sort of the primary goal, which was preservation of principal, and seeking sort of reasonable yield on the principal. But you can speak to that. But.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. The IPS, which is your governing document around these investments, have latitudes for us to lean in and out of markets. It has latitudes for us to lean in and out of cash positions. It has latitudes for us to lean in and out of investment grade fixed income, depending on, again, where we are in the business cycle, what our expectations are, what the trends are. But at the end of the day, I think the expectation, I'd like to set twofold expectation this evening. One is we're going to be hopefully down less than the market when it's down, right? Well, I learned a long time ago, you have to be down less than the market. And we're going to participate on the upside. So we might give something up on the upside. Okay, I think you guys will not shoot Brian and I if we give something up on the upside because we want to build a really efficient portfolio through time. Two is, the other thing I want to, I'm going to say pledge to the committee is we will work with you around different asset allocations and ideas that we're going to implement and then give that support as we go through time. So it's definitely not a forget it and set it or set it and forget it strategy. It's dynamic, it's fluid. And the latitude that the IPS has given us on the onset, I think allows for active management on top of sector and security selection and asset allocation.
And I would argue or note that just your caution in terms of even entering the market, right? So the reality is there's an IPS document right now that provides that 67-33 split in terms of asset classes, and as I think you initially noted, it's all sitting in cash at this point. So I think the reality is that PNC has had this money for a number of weeks at this point, if not a month and a half, and they're being cautious in terms of entry to the market. They have a document that would enable them to go from 0 to 67 to 33, but they've not done that. They've exercised caution and sort of discretion in terms of the appropriateness of when to enter the market. So I think just these last month and a half is sort of demonstrative of your commitment to, react to the realities of the market and not just simply look at a document and say, well, we have this, this authority that's been granted to us. They haven't done that. They've been able to generate yield and return using no risk at this point. And so I think that's also sort of a testament to your approach and recognition of the volatility of the market that you're entering.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, one of the reasons you do that is because you're dealing in an inflation market that's around 10%. So even though you're making 5% on your cash, you're still losing 5%, right? But it's the only option you really have. I guess my only other point and my only concern is with the earnings prognostications you were making, which in a bad case scenario would be a 20% drop vis-a-vis where they were last year, if you extrapolated that into the market, you have a significant impact on equities. And to your point, that's why you need flexibility to move it around. Thank you.
Mr. Board, I can give you my copy because I have this electronic. Yeah. And just for the record, and I think I said this before, this is actually much more conservative than I personally invest in. So that, because we all have different risk profiles and different circumstances. So.
We recognize that and we just want to be prudent stewards of capital. Another person.
Doug Marshall, Lower Makefield Township. I just wanted to ask very quickly, what is PNC's rate of return on the funds compared to the inflation rate?
Inflation right now is at about 6% year over year, maybe a little bit less. Our expected return is 6.8. But honestly, you can take that expected rate of return and throw it out a window because it's fun with numbers. It's about setting the portfolio. Again, 25 years on the institutional buy side, real money background. It's not about what some forecast is going to tell me of 6.8%. It's how are we going to grow capital here? And that's my goal.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, coming up. Take a number.
Board. I'm Lori Gray, Lower Makefield Township, and I appreciate Supervisor Lewis giving the gentleman a copy, but my question really was, and forgive my ignorance, but where is all of this information stored? On the website of Lower Makefield Township and the presentation from today, and then other documents that were referenced so that we can refer back to it, because it's a lot of information to take in.
We will have this on the website.
Yeah, we'd be happy to post this. It's not currently posted. We're just receiving the information today, but we can post it.
And the other documents that you referenced, everything. I mean, there's a lot of concern in the residents of this money being how it's being handled. So I know you referenced some other documents.
Yeah, the investment policy statement, we can include that as well. It's also in here.
All
but,
there, yeah.
but we-
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Like a hard copy.
No. That's electronic is fine. Electronic's fine as long as it's something that we'll get. No, really electronic is fine. It's
And I guess that if I
Thank
could
you.
ask a question of the board, our first meeting, what kind of cadence would you like to see us for meetings? Is it quarterly? Is it, right? So this is a new pool of money, right? I mean, all kidding aside, we're happy to schedule. We want to service you. We want to make sure we're available. We usually meet with our clients quarterly. I don't know if that's, I don't want to overdo it. I don't want to underdo it. I want you to know that we're always available. So if you want to think about it and come back to us, that's perfect. I'll coordinate with David, but we're always available. And we can always put information together and send it out electronically if needed.
I guess related, if I could ask, probably Mr. Kratzer over here would have access, but what sort of access does the township have vis-a-vis Mr. Kratzer to just check up on things, to see how the portfolio is doing? Like when I check out my whatever I have.
I don't know if you want to talk about iHub and.
Yeah,
and stuff, but-
we are we're a large bank. We're very secure. Cyber threats are really real to us. We have CIA, I think, Joe, on staff, FBI, Mossad. I mean, you name it. I'm kidding, but seriously, David and his staff have access to see the portfolio on a daily basis electronically. There are safeguards in place around trading and raising money. And I would venture to say it's state of the art around cybersecurity, but also accessibility for the township.
So, I'll just finish real quick, sorry. And the only reason I asked that is if, rather than having you guys come back every quarter or whatever, can we get some auto-generated memo or something else that we can just look at on a regular basis? And then,
I mean, there's, as you would expect, there's typical monthly statements. I'd, be happy to share those with the board as we get monthly statements. So while there may be sort of quarterly conversations, if that's the cadence that ultimately is desired by the board, we can provide, at least monthly reporting. Again, we have the ability to generate reports on, as Adam said, really on a daily basis if we choose to do so, but at a minimum, there's monthly reporting that's going on. So be happy to start, if that's the desire, happy to start, at least providing access to those monthly statements as we receive those.
Yeah, one quick question I only brought up because unfortunately, I think too much about security. this system that gives the portfolio does not allow trading or reallocation by end users, correct? Okay, good.
Brian and I.
I figured that. I had to ask. And not that I don't 100% trust you.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Having online access to your personal account, it's the same thing, but it's a.
Yep.
Money.
But on my personal account, I can trade, deposit, external funds. Huh?
It's an internal only system. So the only people with access to it are PNC employees. Your account is restricted to myself, Adam, and there's an institutional trust officer as well.
Okay.
So there's 3 people at PNC that have access to your account. If the public wants to interface, or I think the board wants to interface, it would be via the iHub application. This is all technology and we can get into it as we invest in the portfolio. There's monthly statements, a custody statement every single month. It's all in cash right now. We've not vested anything. And then once we begin the investment process, statements will detail that. And then we have our own report similar to these books that we can provide on a quarterly basis. Is how the reporting works.
Apologies. I don't mean to delay us any further. Just 2 quick questions for
hold-
you. My name is
Record.
Breen Desai. I'm in Lower Makefield Township. The first question is, I saw that you had quite a lot of different holdings in the portfolio, which could increase the level of turnover, thereby reducing our overall returns. So I'm just curious how you might think about reallocation and rebalancing. The second question I have for you is how you went through your due diligence process on picking the number of products in there. I saw a lot of BlackRock products, saw a little bit of Baird. There are other asset managers out there with potentially lower expense ratios, higher yields that give you perhaps better performance. So would love answers to those 2.
Great questions.
I don't work in asset management.
No, you do.
How you do?
First question around turnover is in the equity space, we're passive, so they're index. So you can think about when indexes get reconstituted on an annual basis, you'll see turnover that will increase.
Right. So I think my question is more that you have, for example, for the S&P, you have large cap, mid cap, small cap.
Right.
As the products, shift over time, you need to rebalance back to your target allocation to realize the returns that you have in your asset allocation model.
Sure.
So I just want to make sure that the township isn't over-engineering the amount of money that we're spending on rebalancing back to our target allocations.
Okay.
Right.
So the only expenses associated with the funds are the expense ratios listed here. Those are just charged on an annual basis. So the Fidelity 500 index, it's 2 basis points a year. When we trade in the accounts, there's very minimal kind of trading costs. I would say the mutual fund itself trades at NAV, net asset value.
Right.
There are bid-ask spreads with the ETFs. So I wouldn't anticipate us rebalancing more than semi-annually to annually.
Depending on if the portfolio is out of balance. I am a believer, and we are believers that monoportfolio theory trumps everything. So when an asset class is down and you're going to pay your winners, you're going to take money from your winners to buy your losers and vice versa. It's an efficient way of managing the portfolio. We look at it on a minus 2% to plus or minus 5% from an asset class perspective. And then we use judgment and prudency around that. It'll never be greater than plus or minus 5% to the strategic target.
Yeah, and this is strategic asset allocation, not tactical. So, the turnover concept is diminished greatly, because we're refraining from taking market bets effectively.
But that being said, there are times when the winners will run and we'll understand that. And as long as we remain within the investment policy constraints, that's an active decision that you employ PNC to take on your behalf. How we vet the managers that are in the portfolio, there's a 34-person manager research team. We track tens of thousands of products. This is the only time I'll actually say COVID was a good thing because we can actually get to more asset management firms virtually than we got to get on planes, right? So our travel is cut down significantly. The efficiency in which we can cover managers is improved. There is a whole process around vetting managers, approved, hold, sell. We and Brian and the team utilize best judgments around how we wanted to construct portfolio construction. in the fixed income space, to your point, where we are in the market cycle. We didn't, there are funds, there are strategies, there are asset classes that I could have found a 10% yield. But I would have had to go down below investment grade, much more speculative. I didn't want to do that.
No, that's totally
Yeah,
fair, but
yeah.
doing a simple check on, Vanguard.com shows you core bond at 10 bips versus with a yield,
Yep.
50 to 100 bips more than what you're seeing in Baird. So I was just curious.
Well, it's a great question. We want to actively manage the interest rate risk here. Just because the Fed says that they're not moving higher, if inflation comes in at 8% next month, guess what? They're probably moving higher. This is what the market is in 2023 outside of bank failures. It is the inflation interest rate structure that's going to dominate 2023 and into 2024. So I don't want to own passively the bond market right here, given how active monetary policy is in the US.
An active product, but that's okay.
What's active product? The
I
bond
was asking
market?
you about the Vanguard core
Yeah.
product, which is an active product, but that's fine.
Vanguard is certainly well known as, it's a local firm for sure. They are well known as being a low cost provider, probably the lowest cost provider out there. Did you fact check that 10 basis points? Okay.
That's the Admiral share class.
All right, for admirals. Yeah, I mean, we have conviction is what I would say. We believe in concert with our investment office and as Adam said, we've got 40 researchers that do this day in and day out. They help us identify the investment managers that we want to work with. So I think we would say is we have more conviction in Baird rather than Vanguard, and there's a trade-off with risk and return as well. So these we definitely factor in. I would say 30 basis points is certainly reasonable for an active core plus. I mean, Vanguard's always in the bottom decile. That's how they operate. They're basically a not-for-profit company.
Mhm.
So, I mean, but it's a great point. I mean, I don't think we have any Vanguard products in here, but yeah, I mean, you can totally.
I'm sure there's an evolution around different managers and different styles and different cost structures that we'll utilize here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Anybody online?
I got online also. It doesn't end.
I'm kidding. Talk radio. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much
Thank
for your presentation.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank
Give
you.
us some
All the
stuff to
great
think about.
questions.
Looking forward to partnering. Thank you. And let us know how we can help and be a resource in any facet around the big bank, many different areas of the bank. Let us know how we can help. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And with that, we'll go to engineers report, item 7.
Time to go from banker speak to engineer speak and
Yeah.
kick it up a notch.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Just
It's confidence.
You have in front of you my engineer's report. I'm going to go into the agenda items. So the first item is to consider pay application number 3, which is a final pay application for Maple Vale Drainage Project, Ben Cardino Contractors, Inc., in the amount of $29,342.65. They've completed the project. We've inspected it. They've restored the area where they've installed the storm sewer pipe. They've addressed all concerns that we've had as far as a punch list item. They've submitted a maintenance bond. And so therefore, we're comfortable recognizing that the work is completed and recommending payment in the amount.
Mr. Chair, I move that we pay application number 3 final for the Mapleville Drainage Project to Ben Cardino Contractors, Inc. in the amount of $29,342.65.
Second.
A motion to approve pay application number 3 from Supervisor Lewis, seconded by Supervisor Grenier. Any comments or questions by the board?
So we've had some significant rain events over the last week. I noticed some pooling of water on, I guess it would be the west side of Taylorsville Road, across from that Maple Vale property. Now, but I didn't see anything in Maple Vale. So have we looked with the recent rain to see if we've had any pooling of water? And because normally you get like yards are filled with water. And
I haven't heard anything. I would say that Also to the capture of those of runoff or stormwater runoff into those inlets might not be as efficient as it will be once the final roadway is paved. And
Okay.
so I would caution against, if somebody did get water in their front yard or something like that, well, we're going to improve the situation
Well-
once we pave the road.
What was interesting is the west side had some, but the east side didn't have any. And normally the east side of the road also has pooling in the front yards. And I didn't see any of that, which is, I would think is a good sign.
That's a
Yeah.
good sign, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we did not receive any, calls from any neighbors on Maplevale as well.
Still have the second stage of the project.
Right, so
We still have the second, phase two of the project, which we're, waiting to hear about grant funding for that work that would help to address that as well. Yeah.
Okay.
And I can anecdotally say, given that I know the neighborhood very well, I have not heard or received any messages about that.
Any public comment? Here and now, I'll call the question. All those in favor, signify by saying aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it 5-0. Item B.
Thank you. Next item is to consider pay application number 3 for the Woodside Road Bike Path to Richard E. Pearson Construction, Inc. in the amount of $385,159.52. The project is approaching substantial completion. They've paved the trail in its entirety. They've put down the ADA ramp detectable warning surfaces. That's those red rectangular pieces at the intersections that assist with ADA functionality. What they really need to do is come back and restore the grass areas. They were going back and forth with a few items as far as the submittal of the seed mixture, which we had to review. We want, for the swales in between the trail and the roadway, we want a no-mow, water tolerant, salt tolerant type of seed mixture. And so they had some trouble locating that and getting that from a PennDOT approval source, but that's kind of where they are. They've submitted that. We're reviewing it. So I suspect that the final stabilization measures should be coming shortly. And so this payment then is not a final, it's not a semi-final. It does not include the paving of the trail. So it's pretty much, for the most part, it's everything up to the paving of the trail is included in this pay application, which we've inspected and has been completed.
Mr. Chair, I move that we pay application number 3 for Woodside Road Bike Path to Richard E. Pearson Construction in the amount of $385,159.52.
Second.
Motion made by.
Sorry.
Okay. Motion made by Supervisor Lewis, seconded by Supervisor Grenier to consideration to approve pay application 3 for the Woodside Road Bike Path. Any questions, comments by the board? Ms. Bundy?
I have a question. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, as you may know, I'm around there quite a lot. Interestingly enough. I don't know if there's any other place in the township that has a path but doesn't have a curb. And there's portions of the path that doesn't have a curb and has a very small shoulder between roadway, grass, and then path. Right now, there's those lovely orange things. And while they're not really lovely, I do think they bring attention and slow traffic. And I'm wondering if it's worth either, I don't know if it's you, Andy, or if it's safe, just having somebody look to that because of the rise of the road and whatnot. Are people walking or biking on that path going to be safe? So should we have someone look at that?
I will say that the bike path was designed in accordance with AASHTO standards as far as highway safety. But I'm certainly willing to take another look at that, or if the board is willing to have the traffic engineer who did look at the design initially. If that's a ongoing and persistent concern, then if the board wishes, we can look at that.
I don't know, Dave, if it's even just worth something, asking Derek to start out looking at, because it does look unusual to me. But maybe that, I'm sure, Andy, that it meets the standards that you say, and yet, since it looks so different than anything else I'm familiar with, it caught my attention.
And I will say this, the way that they have it currently graded is not going to be the final grade. There is going to be a swale in between the path and the roadway in a majority of the portion of that. So there will be basically a 1 foot deep ditch that vehicles veering off the road would go into prior to coming up onto the trail. But yeah.
I think to Supervisor Blundy's point, after any project is constructed, especially like this, it's always worth doing sort of an as-built, not as-built survey, but an as-built walkthrough just to see how it's working. I mean, we did the same thing with the roundabouts or the mini roundabouts here, just to make sure they were working correctly.
And the other thing I would add is that this is the trail is on the north side of the roadway, and that generally carries westbound traffic, and westbound traffic would be going uphill for the entire length of the roadway. So yeah, they're slower.
Is it usable yet? I haven't been.
Yeah, actually, you can walk pretty much all the way of it. It's in pretty good shape. They haven't taken the plastic off of the ADA ramps yet, and there's still the pylons. There was one utility pole that had to be moved.
Yeah, there's still one utility pole that needs to be relocated, and that's we're reaching out to them on a I would say twice a week. Who's determined?
Who's the offending?
Verizon.
Oh, it's Verizon?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we know those people.
We do. Yeah.
And follow up, since we're here, the crossing of Taylorsville Road, have you had a chance to talk to the Bridge and Joint Toll Bridge Commission?
So that was something that was being coordinated through SAFE. I did speak with Joe Fiacco today, trying to determine the status of that meeting. He has been trying to coordinate that meeting. He reached out. He did speak with someone from the Bridge Commission today. So that meeting is scheduled or anticipated to be scheduled here in the near future. I did mention to him as well, to the extent that we have trouble coordinating or facilitating a meeting, that you were gracious enough to offer your services in terms of helping with that. So, so that is in the works.
Awesome.
Thank you. Any public comment? Online? Hearing none, I'll call the question. Thank you. Call the question. All those in favor of pay application number 3 for the Woodside Bike Path, signify by saying aye and raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
One, aye, abstain.
Ayes have it, 4-0-1.
And the next agenda item is general project updates. I don't know if there's any projects in particular that the board has questions on. I'm happy to answer them, but I know that we have just completed the pool painting project, and that will be on the agenda for the next meeting to pay the contractor for that work. We have drafted the contracts and sent the contracts out for the 2023 road program. And so we're anticipating receiving that, within the next couple of weeks and proceeding with that.
I guess, I don't know if this is for you, Andy, or maybe for Mr. Kratzer, but we've seen a lot of general project updates and from PennDOT and others doing work in the township or near the township.
Sure.
Where roads are going to be closed for several months. In some cases, they're using different materials than we typically use. We have the road work being done in front of as part of the Prickett Preserve project. So it's not stuff that we're responsible for or engaged in, but it's going on in the township and it affects our residents. So I'm just wondering if there's some way we can get more updates to people so they're aware, because it'll affect their everyday.
Yeah, we'd be happy to share that information as we receive it on some of the projects that you note. I was going to make just sort of general mention of one Stony Hill Road project, the replacement of that bridge structure. I know the chief is in some conversations as well related to the detour plan. And so we continue to get information from PennDOT and try to, understand that project so that we can effectively kind of communicate what the expectations of the traveling public should be. I don't know, Chief, if you have any comments on that one at this point, or?
Not really, other than we'll have a blast on social media tomorrow about the bridge and the detour route.
We can share that far and wide. Then.
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And then as it relates to another sort of project that you're referencing in terms of materials, so Dolington Road, there's been some conversation about that and as I think the board is aware, Dolington Road is a state road under the jurisdiction of PennDOT. And so there were some signs that were posted on Dolington and in the surrounding area regarding oil and chipping that road, or tar and chipping that road. Again, ultimately that is a PennDOT project. Oil and chipping is really a maintenance activity. But we have expressed some concerns to PennDOT relative to the both volume and speed of traffic and the appropriateness of that application on that roadway. And so Derek has been interfacing with PennDOT on that, again, trying to make sure that they're clear on some of the concerns that we have relative to that kind of approach and that application on that roadway. The contractor is also sort of advocating to PennDOT as well. Obviously, the contractor has an interest in doing additional work, but they also share some of the concerns that we've expressed, as does our understanding. The District 6 staff that work in the field have also expressed some concerns about this potential approach to maintenance on Dolington. And so that's sort of an ongoing conversation, and we'll continue to try to press the department to perhaps reconsider their approach there, or at least do things that could potentially mitigate some of the concerns that we're expressing relative to the material being loose and so forth. So there's some discussion about doing what's called a fog seal, and Andy probably can speak to that if you want more of a technical explanation. But we are obviously monitoring all of those projects, and to the extent that we are shared information, we'll make sure to communicate that information via the channels that Chief mentioned.
Thank you.
Any public comment or questions on general updates, general project updates? Hearing none, we'll go to the manager's report, item 8.
So the first item for the board's consideration is approval of Resolution 23-10, authorizing townships membership in the Pennsylvania Local Government Investment Trust. This was a topic of conversation at your prior meeting. Pliget is not a traditional bank, but essentially is a financial institution, which is membership based. We currently do not have a relationship with Pliget. Most jurisdictions in the Commonwealth do have active accounts with Pliget. So this is one of the required steps in order to fill out what they refer to as a new investor application, which essentially is an application for a new account. The intention here, as we talked about at the last meeting, currently the remaining bond proceeds from the debt that was issued in 2016 is currently at Penn Community Bank. Our recommendation would be to take those assets out of that sort of commingled account at this point, transfer those assets to Pliget as part of Pliget's service, and again, just sort of common handling of tax-exempt proceeds. They'll do arbitrage rebate calculations and monitor sort of the various spending rules that govern us from an IRS standpoint. So again, if the staff is recommending adoption of the resolution, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
We'll hear a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Supervisor Grenier, seconded by Supervisor Lewis to approve Resolution 23-10, authorizing membership in Pliget. Any comments, questions by the board? Any public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye and raise your hand. Aye.
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 Ayes have it, 5-0.
Thank you. The next item is consider approval of resolution 23-11 for disposition of records. Again, as the board is aware, you've done this in the past. The board has adopted the manual promulgated by the Pennsylvania Municipal, Museum and Historical Commission related to the retention of municipal records. There are itemized records that are noted in the resolution that are beyond the required retention. And so we would recommend adoption of resolution 23-11 to dispose of these records consistent with state statute.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve resolution 23-11 for disposition of records.
Second.
Motion made by Supervisor Lewis, seconded by Supervisor Grenier to approve resolution 23-11. Any comments or questions by the board? Any public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it, 5-0.
Thank you very much. The next item relates to two projects that are identified as projects within the submitted pollution reduction plan that the township has prepared as part of its MS4 permit. One relates to 5 Mile Woods, and Andy can talk maybe about the specifics of these projects in terms of scope. And then the second project relates to a stream bank restoration project that was contemplated at the middle school. There are two proposals before you from RVE related to both of these projects. At this point, we're seeking, we're looking at some state funding opportunities. There's some grant opportunities to potentially offset some of the costs associated with these projects. In the RVE scope, that really relates to phase one services that are noted in each of those individual proposals. To the extent that we have an interest in submitting applications to these funding programs, we would be at this point just simply seeking authorization to have RVE work on the phase one services that are noted in each of the proposals. Andy, I don't know if you would again just provide just sort of a quick summary of what was at least initially thought about and contemplated, and then to the extent the board has any questions on the funding program that's available.
Yeah, so 5 Mile Woods parking area improvements would be right now it's a stone parking lot that's compacted stone and generally considered an impervious area. We would be replacing that with pervious paving, pervious asphalt paving. And so then this design would then be one of the approved best management practices by DEP to get credit towards your pollution reduction plan, which has to be implemented by 2027. So there are grant programs out there that we are looking to apply for to get funding or reimbursement of funding for both engineering and construction costs towards this. And so we would be applying for that work, in conjunction with designing it. And then also for Charles Bain Middle School, stream bank restoration, DEP has basically come out and said that the best way to get their more bang for your buck as far as credits from a pollution reduction plan is to implement stream bank restoration projects. And this seems like this is a good opportunity to not only get grant funding for a pollution reduction plan, but because it's on school property, it has an educational component to it. We think that would make for a more attractive grant application, and therefore we're proceeding with that. And it's also in the pollution reduction plan, again, that has to be implemented by 2027. So that's the thinking there is that, again, we're going to proceed with design and apply for grants that would provide funding for reimbursement.
I'll need a motion for each individually. Is there a motion?
Sure. I'll make a motion to approve the proposal from RVE for 5 Mile Woods parking area improvements associated with the township's pollution reduction plan.
Or a second?
Second.
Motion made by Supervisor Grenier, seconded by Supervisor Lewis to approve RV's proposal for 5 Mile Woods parking area improvements. Any comments or questions by the board?
I go to 5 Mile Woods a fair amount with my family to go for walks and whatnot, and that parking lot is full of potholes. We know that. In terms of, there's a few years until we have to do this under the plan. Can you speak a little bit to the long-term O&M and how long this approach will last in this situation to make sure that we're not having to redo it over and over again?
So, generally, porous paving parking lots last just as long as regular asphalt paving parking lots. There is an additional maintenance that's required for porous paving parking lots as sediment gets into the whole idea of porous paving is to have more voids within the paving surface so that water can penetrate down through the asphalt and get into the layers underneath, the stone layer underneath, and infiltrate into the ground, as opposed to running off and being captured by inlets and entering the storm sewer system. And so there is a little bit more maintenance as far as vacuuming the parking lot routinely, whether it be monthly or quarterly. That's something that we'd have to look at and provide recommendations for once we get into design. But as far as long-term longevity of the parking lot, it should be similar to asphalt paving.
So essentially, this is something that Mr. Fuller will have to work into his plan, right? Or who's ultimately responsible.
Correct.
To do that. Okay.
Any other?
Yeah, along those lines, do we have the equipment? There's like a brush thing for that, as well as the vacuum. We've got the equipment for that.
I don't know that.
I mean, it's possible. There are third-party companies that
They
come
just
in
do
and,
it.
can
Yeah.
do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are the, and I know I can't hold you to this, what are the odds that we get the grant? Where 10 is metaphysical certitude and 0 is, well, 0.
I don't know that I want to assign a number to it. I will say this, that there are a lot of grant opportunities out there for pollution reduction plan projects. And actually DCD has a lot of programs, and then DCNR as well, because 5 Mile Woods is a recreation area. And so we get the benefit of having a recreation component with that. So that opens it up for more grant opportunities than would otherwise some other projects. So again, I don't know that I want to assign a number for it, because I'd rather try touching the moon than predicting what the CCED is going to decide. But I will say this, that historically RVE has had success in other municipalities in obtaining grants for pollution reduction plans, and it seems like there's a lot of money that DCED is providing for programs of this nature, because they understand the difficult positions that municipalities are in addressing this pollution reduction plan.
So if things go south and it doesn't go our way on that, we're only out about what, $27,000 of the amount on the
you mean for the cost of phase one? Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I believe so.
Okay. 50%? 60?
Oh, I think it's more. I think it's more than 60%. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go. Got a number.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Between 60 and 100. How about that?
I mean, it is something, I mean, you know, we have obligations, we have regulatory obligations, there's permit requirements, we can't simply depend on the Commonwealth in order to fund these projects. And so we do need to develop a strategy long-term in terms of how we're going to fund and finance these increased, you know, regulatory obligations, but ultimately also quality of life issues as well, right? I mean, as we were talking about Maple Vale, that's as, you know, there's regulatory requirements and then there's quality of life issues as well that relate to these projects. And so that is something that we're going to have a conversation on.
I will say that these two you know, out of all of the projects that are within the pollution reduction plan, these are the two that are unique. The remaining projects are basin retrofits. And so getting these out of the way, you know, it is beneficial from that regard. We might be able to take advantage of an economy of scale by doing multiple basin retrofits with one project or 1 year.
And with this one, it's a parking lot that's in bad shape that needs fixing, and we get credit for doing it for another program. So it seems like a win-win.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the logic in selecting that for the pollution reduction plan.
Ms. Bundy, Mr. McCartney, you have any comments or questions for them about this? Any public comment? Yes, ma'am.
Lori Gray, Lower Makefield Township. And I'm just, I know that there are things that we have to do, and is this one of them? And I'm glad that Supervisor Lewis asked the question about what happens if we don't get the grant, because they're not guaranteed to us. And I keep hearing and reading about how our township, we know we're trying to think of other ways to bring in revenue because our expenses are greater than our revenues. And I get concerned coming to the meetings, which I've been coming to over the last few months, and things get, you know, expensed and approved, and things that are unbudgeted or things that are over budget. And where's the balance? Who's monitoring all of this? And how are we as residents supposed to know exactly where we stand? And I'm getting very concerned, because if my taxes are going to go up, and I keep coming to these meetings and I hear all of these things getting approved that were never budgeted, or they're over budget, or we were going to get grants, but we didn't get approved. Who's monitoring all of this? And where can I find where all of this is being monitored and managed?
Sure. I guess to answer your fundamental question, these are required projects. So as part of.
So if they've been budgeted, not to interrupt you, but if they're required, then they should have been budgeted already?
I don't, the township, the application process has not been budgeted in terms of a specific project, but these projects, as Andy had mentioned, are required to be implemented by 2027, you said, right? As part of a regulatory permit that's issued to the township.
Yeah, the township has a permit for the municipal storms.
So
systems.
recognizing the, you know, again, budgeted, unbudgeted sort of aspect of this, there's a funding opportunity. As what I'm trying to convey is that we can't continue to rely on funding opportunities, external funding opportunities, in order to meet our obligations. This is a regulatory obligation. There is no choice of the matter as it relates to implementation of this. So to your point, this is not budgeted per se in terms of a specific line item in the adopted budget, but there is an opportunity to offset required costs that are going to be realized by this municipality.
So I think you raised such an important point that this is a regulatory. So something we have to do, something we should be budgeting for if we haven't, something we need to make sure we budget for, and then take into consideration for those things that are not regulatory, not required, to not approve, which we don't seem to do.
You raised an excellent point. And one of the things that we're going to discuss in the next few months before we get to the 24 budget will be to address exactly what you're talking about. We have, and I think it's a good point to maybe stop here and say that the difference between our budget, you know, money coming in, money going out, and our cash position are two different things right now.
Understood.
And part of this is because we sold the sewer system.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is because we have millions of dollars in bond funds that are for projects that are basically sitting there waiting to be spent on projects. If we don't, especially in the short term, if we don't get the income, we have the money to do these. But that means there'll be less money for other projects. And we have, things that are mandated have to be done. Things that aren't mandated, like, we'll just say fixing Macclesfield. Modernizing Macclesfield might have to be cut back because we don't have the money. Patterson Farm preservation. We may not have as much money, may have to find other sources of income to do what we want. Exactly right. And the conversation that we will have in the next few months will address those concerns, I hope.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'll be in the audience listening and
There you
telling.
go.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. Thanks.
Any other public comment?
Sounds like me.
Yes, sir.
My name is George Fox, Lower Makefield resident. I'm curious if a cell tower can go up in 5 Mile Woods and the proceeds could possibly fund the project. Is it a possibility? Has anybody looked into that yet?
Yeah, there was some, are you talking in relation to the most current cell phone proposal or the tower proposal? And
Another source of income.
yeah,
Cell
yeah,
tower that's owned by the township.
right, right.
Owned township property.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we have recently, been approached by folks, and again, we're not, obviously the providers or the people working for the providers are going to dictate sort of location and where that needs to be from a service or coverage, standpoint. If you're talking about in relation to the matter before the zoning hearing board currently,
Looking for another avenue.
yeah,
Trying to help you out.
yeah. So that site will not address that coverage gap at this point. But yes, there may be opportunities to to place those kinds of assets on township owned property.
Very good. The one thing with places like 5 Mile Woods, and I don't know this, Dave, you might know this off the top of your head. When you have a conservation easement, like Patterson Farm has a conservation easement, 5 Mile Woods might have a conservation, the type of place that would. There's certain restrictions you can't do for those deed restrictions, whereas other places like right around the corner here on township property, we have one, so we could do it here, that kind of thing. So it's a great idea. We just have to look.
How many acres do you need to have to be conservation?
It's not an acreage thing. It's a type of land use, and you apply to a program, whether it's a county or state program, and it gets up
Very well.
and it protects the land from development.
Thought it might be a solution.
Yeah,
Worth
no,
looking at if we
absolutely.
can do it.
Any other public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the 5 Mile Woods project development, signify by saying aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it 5-0.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the proposal from REVE for the Charles Bain Middle School Stream Bank Restoration Project.
Second?
Motion made by Supervisor Lewis, seconded by Supervisor Grenier for the Charles Bain Middle School Stream Bank Restoration Project. The only question I have, Andy, and for David, is this is on Pennsbury School property, the appropriateness of the board of the township doing this project?
We've actually talked with the school district and they would be amenable to the project. We talked with them before including the project in a pollution reduction plan.
For them too?
I'm sorry, we've talked to the school district about that.
Well, I understand that they would give us permission to do it.
Yes.
I'm talking about fees, paying part of the bill. I mean, they didn't say anything about that.
No, they didn't. Not to me.
I just, I don't mind spending for projects and I don't mind spending for reduce. But I just feel that, if this was township property, I would feel different. If it's school district property, if the board wants to go that way, I'm fine with it, but I have a little bit of a philosophical problem with, unless, this affects the township. Right. It does the school district.
Yeah,
I mean, it is a mandate on the township. It is a requirement of the township.
I just want to put it out there.
So yeah, I would say while it's it's a publicly owned piece of land, it would be no different than negotiating with any other private property owner in order to gain access in order to implement something. So
Correct.
That's the answer I want to hear. Okay, cool. Any other members of?
And Charles Bain, they were in front of us however many months ago, for improvements, right? So we know they're doing a lot of work there. We know the stream wraps around the building. There are a couple of ball fields nearby. They're kind of sort of related to what you were just asking. They're fully on board and with the design and everything else that you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't, I mean, we've presented them with just a general concept. We haven't presented them with any design plans or anything like that, but yes. They understand what the scope of the work is intended to be, and yes, they were amenable to that.
I mean, it's a great opportunity for middle school students to, yeah, another STEM or STEAM opportunity for them to learn interactive and all that, which is great. I just want to make sure that there's no surprises in terms of what you're planning on designing versus what they're expecting, and make sure that doesn't affect.
I think that the township's committed to, coordinating with the school district to make sure that there's no surprises.
Have the board comment? Any public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, signify by saying aye and raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it, 5-0. Okay, and item D.
So the final item that I have, actually I have one other item, but is just an update for the board regarding Portnoy Law Associates, who the board engaged in June of 2022 for purposes of collecting outstanding balances related to the sanitary sewer system. Those notices have gone out, as I think most are aware at this point. There were approximately 1,300 notices that were sent to folks that had outstanding balances related to service that was provided, sanitary sewer service that was provided by the township, billed through Bucks County Sewer and Water Authority prior to the sale of the asset to Aqua. We've received a number of calls, obviously related to the notice. Some of that probably relating in part to just the separation between the transaction, the sale transaction, and ultimately having discussion with the customer base relative to the outstanding balances. It seems as though, and we're continuing to work through this, it seems as though I would say a large majority of the outstanding balances relate to the last quarter bill, or the last bill that was issued by Bucks County Sewer and Water Authority, which would have been issued in March of 2022. Yeah, so March 4th of 2022. We obviously continue to explain that to folks as they're calling. In those circumstances, we're working with them to really focus on the balance that was outstanding as of the end of March of 2022. So what the customer received, or those that, not all customers, but the 1,300 or so that received these, what that's called is a validation notice. It's sort of the first step or first notice in the collection process. There was a $25 essentially administrative fee associated with that. And in circumstances where folks are saying that they did not receive that last bill, and the balances are supporting the fact that it relates to sort of that last quarter of service, we're working with both the customer and Portnoy to try to address that validation notice fee, and not necessarily have that being borne by the customer, if you will. Obviously, there's other circumstances where there's more significant delinquency, folks that have not paid their bill for extended periods of time, and those circumstances are being dealt with, obviously differently. In terms of the validation notice, I just wanted to make sort of two notes for the benefit of the board and members of the public. One, folks are seeing, this is a debt collection effort on the notice. Again, that's required language. That being said, there is no credit agency reporting or anything of that nature that's occurring at this point. It's validating the legitimacy of the debt and to the extent that a customer has a dispute relative to the validity of that debt, then at that point, things stop and we work through those individual circumstances with customers. The other thing that has been some point of discussion is that, folks have received more than one notice at a property. That is required from a statutory standpoint. That is not an attempt to double collect the outstanding balance. It is a requirement that Portnoy is operating, again, consistent with the statute. So to the extent that a husband or wife or other adults living in the same property are receiving the same notice, again, that is not an attempt to double collect on that outstanding balance. It's just statutorily required to provide notice to essentially all adult property owners living in a property. Again, we'll continue to work through the issues. Some folks have been asking for sort of account histories. We don't maintain detailed account histories because, again, Bucks County Sewer and Water was the billing service provider prior to the transaction, but we're working with the authority to try to obtain those in circumstances where customers are seeking those. So, continue to work through the issues that may present as we're trying to collect the outstanding balances that are due for services provided. So I don't know if any of the board members have any questions or.
It sounds like roughly 10% of the ratepayers receive that notice.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do we know of that group how many fall into the oops, we didn't get that final notice, so ignore that $25 versus
Yeah, it seems like a significant portion. And again, I obviously wasn't here at that time.
Right.
I'm not sure what would have happened with that last quarter bill. I don't know if it had to, I don't know all the specifics, but it seems as though a fair amount that we're interacting with at this point that are calling the office, it relates to that last quarter of service or that last bill that would have been issued in March of 2022.
Last time I checked, there was a spreadsheet that had about 285 people. Am I rough? This list? Okay. These were the hardcore delinquents, right? These are the people that haven't paid, right? Okay. So of that, we think 1,000 might be in this quarter thing then, because that's a relatively significant portion, but hopefully relatively quick to resolve then, right?
Yeah, I mean, most folks, when they look back at their records, they say, "Oh, yeah, I noticed I didn't make payment in March of 2022, or I didn't make payment in April of 2022." Many of those circumstances are resolved at that point. They'll say, "Oh, okay, I've consistently paid my bills. I'm not intending to be, delinquent on this outstanding balance," and they'll just simply make arrangements. They'll go and make payment or issue checks or whatever it may be to Portnoy. So yeah, I would say that again, a significant portion of those outstanding balances do seemingly relate to that last quarter of service.
But all this is being handled through Portnoy, not the township, not anyone else.
We're obviously trying to help people through that process. So to the extent that, folks say, "Well, I did pay that bill," and for some reason, I don't know why it wouldn't be reflected. We're saying, you can either provide that information to Portnoy or you can provide it to us, and we'll happily sort of interface with you and try to resolve that issue. So again, we're trying to be responsive to the customers as they're calling in and trying to accommodate them based on whatever their preferences are.
And the feedback on interaction with Portnoy, do they have any yet, customers?
Again, I think it hasn't been overly, negative. Again, Portnoy has also been very, accommodating. We've been interfacing with them on a regular basis. They're keeping track of these circumstances where, folks are saying that, they haven't received their last quarter bill. And so there's been ongoing dialogue with Portnoy. I haven't personally received any, expression of concern regarding Portnoy's approach or anything of that nature. I think, to the extent that there's been any frustration, It's really related to, some of the access to information that, Bucks County Sewer and Water Authority has is in relation to those billing records. But again, I've been interfacing with them as well and trying to come to some sort of resolution to make sure that folks that are seeking that detailed account history are able to obtain it in some fashion. So that's sort of an ongoing conversation with the authority.
This is where I provide my recurring public service announcement. If you are in the 285 people that are the hardcore delinquents and you have not paid your sewer bill, please, please, please pay your sewer bill. These people, we didn't hire them because we really wanted to, but because it's a significant amount of money and we have a duty to the community to make sure we collect. And they are all that you would expect in a debt collector and more. Just saying from the outset. So please, please, please pay your outstanding bills. Thank you.
Anybody from the public wants to ask a question to the manager about this subject? Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Good exercise.
Liens against these properties for these outstanding debts?
Some of the properties are liened. So going back to Supervisor Lewis's statement, those that had significant delinquent balances, Hill Wallach actually, I think was involved in the liening process. As it relates to these smaller balances, again, which are generally reflective of maybe the last quarter, there's no liens being placed on those properties at this point.
Yeah, I would say the long-standing ones are have been liened, and that's something that's been done by whomever the solicitor is going back at least 30 years that I'm aware of. So, but those are, again, Mr. Lewis's point, the ones that are recurrently delinquent and pile on the charges over time.
Item 9, solicitor's report.
The only other item, again, not on the agenda, but just I know is a sort of an ongoing sort of conversation amongst some members of the public. Some members of the public relates to some concern relative to water quality that again the water service provider in the township is P American Water. And I just wanted to make mention that, again, we continue to talk to P American Water about sort of communication expectations. I know, that's something that's important to all of you to make sure that there's effective communication. And so we'll work with, P American Water to continue to try to improve communication and make sure that folks are appropriately informed.
I know we brought them in front of us back in 2019 after the infamous turbidity event, and they made some promises for better communication and interaction. So hopefully we can hold them to it.
Sure.
Okay.
Mr. Phillip. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. An executive session started tonight at 6:30. All board members were at the executive session. Items related to personnel, collective bargaining, real estate, and litigation were discussed at the executive session, was concluded just before this meeting started. First item under my report is to consider approval of resolution number 23-9, amending resolutions numbers 323 and 326 regarding the composition of the Township's Historical Commission. You may recall that the last meeting we had presented a resolution increasing the core number of members from 7 to 9, but it was discussed at that meaning to perhaps revise that to maintain the current membership at 7, but to add 3 alternate members, which we have done in the updated revised resolution. The only thing that we have left blank is the term length for the alternates. I suggest 4 years for each because as many of them will perhaps ascend to the regular membership, that will still leave time in their remaining terms for other alternates to be appointed, but it's entirely up to the board how you want to do that. So if you want the 4-year term or whatever term, let me know and then in the motion.
Motion first.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve resolution 23-9, amending resolutions 323 and 326 regarding the composition of the Township's Historical Commission and place the term for the alternate members at 4 years.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion made by Supervisor Lewis, seconded by Supervisor Blondie to approve Resolution 23-9, amending Resolution 323 and 326 regarding composition of the Township's Historical Commission, allowing for 3 alternates at a 4-year term. Any discussion?
I can provide a quick 30 seconds for folks. Couple things, the Historical Commission is starting to really gain steam. A number of people have become interested. We want to channel that interest among the community. To that end, as you saw in the announcements, there is going to be an important cleanup at the Slate Hill Cemetery on Saturday. But by bringing these folks in as alternates, they can impact the voting and the policies of the Historical Commission and help us preserve as much of that as possible. And in cases where people are not available, still not hurt us getting a quorum of members so that we can make decisions. So I think this is a relatively reasonable compromise. We do the similar thing in the zoning hearing board for those who are curious. Also, since we're talking about the Historical Commission, we're working on helping to find additional tombstones that have been buried underneath. And we're working at getting ground penetrating radar. I'd like to thank the chief for helping us out on that. We're working on that as well. So hopefully building respect for preservation of history in Lower Makefield.
Any other comments by the board, questions? Any public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Ayes have it, 5-0.
Thank you. I think the next item, which is to consider re-advertisement of an ordinance amending the township zoning ordinance for providing for open space requirements. I believe that will be, we're going to request or recommend tabling that tonight. Our office has been working diligently on updating this and want to make sure that we have all comments from all agencies and entities that are providing input. That would include our own Historical Commission, and my partner Barbara Kirk did circulate what she thought were the latest comments. We haven't heard back, obviously, because of the time frame. There's reasons for that which don't need to be discussed publicly, but our recommendation is, do you want to table it or defer it, however you want to do it? You want to table it to a specific meeting, the next meeting, is that what we'd like to do?
Before we do that, I want to take the opportunity to say that, except for the Planning Commission, all the groups that are supposed to look at it have looked at it and made comments. The Planning Commission has made a lot of input into this, but they haven't met. They won't meet until Monday, right, to consider a recommendation. So this is very important legislation that'll help protect a significant portion of developable land in the township, and I hope that we can get a resolution on this in short term. Having said that, I will entertain a motion to postpone until our first June meeting.
June 3rd.
Mr. Chair, I move that we postpone the re-advertisement of an ordinance amending the Lower Makefield Township zoning ordinance, providing for open space requirements until the board's first June meeting.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion made by Supervisor Lewis, seconded by Supervisor Blondie to postpone until the first June meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Ayes have it, 5-0. We'll postpone until the first June.
Thank you. That's all I have for that part of my report. Next, for zoning hearing board. I know, Mr. Board, I think you're here for item B under that. So, okay. Item A, appeal number 23-2004 ADR Investments LLC applies for the property located at Reading Avenue, tax parcel 20-034-020-001. The applicant is requesting a variance from Township Zoning Ordinance 200-22 to allow a front yard setback of 7.3 feet, when 35 feet is the minimum required. Township Zoning Ordinance 200-22 to allow a rear yard setback of 10 feet, when 45 feet is the minimum required, and Township Zoning Ordinance 200-51 capital B 6 small b to allow woodland disturbance of 55%, when 25% is the maximum allowed in order to construct a 1,574 square foot dwelling and an 855 square foot driveway. We would recommend at a minimum participation, given the numerous items of relief requested and frankly the we use the term drastic changes from the standards in the ordinance. So that'd be our recommendation at a minimum. So we require a vote if that was the board's sentiment.
I'll make a motion to participate in zoning hearing board appeal number 23-2004.
Second.
Second.
Motion made by Supervisor Grenier, seconded by Supervisor McCartney to participate in appeal number 23-2004. Any comments by the board?
Will this be when will this be on their meeting agenda?
I don't think it's on for the 15th. It may be on for the 15th, and that'll be for the one after that, I think.
Okay. If at any, as you mentioned, some of these requests are pretty drastic, right? If the board, upon hearing any of that, if we choose to change our mind, not to change our minds, but go a little harder, let's say, and
Still have that option open.
still have that option. Okay.
Sure.
Keep that open.
Yep.
Yeah, it does appear the matter is on the agenda for the 15th of May. Both this and the next item as well. At least that's what's noted on the application.
Okay.
I couldn't tell, but is this on the railroad side of the heading? Or is it further back where it's not an issue?
If you look at the drawing, the railroad is right behind it. Yeah. It's on that side
So
of
it's
it.
a relatively narrow
Yes, yes.
section of.
Yep, and that's reflecting the relief requested because of the shape of the parcel relative to that location, yes. And what the request is to build.
Little concerned about
Mhm.
even just participating.
Well, you can modify your,
Uh,
up to you.
that's,
Either way, somebody from my office will be there, you know.
I understand, but I also have faith in the zoning hearing board.
Right.
Any other comments by the board? Any public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those wishing to participate in the appeal 23-2004, signify by saying aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Ayes have it 5-0.
Next, appeal 23-2005, again, ADR Investments LLC. Appeals for the property located at Heacock Road, tax parcel 20-012-018, requesting a variance from Township Zoning Ordinance 200-30 to allow a front yard setback on a collector road of 8.5 feet instead of the required 100 feet, and Township Zoning Ordinance 200-30 to allow a rear yard setback of 10 feet instead of the required 50 feet in order to construct a 1,568 square foot dwelling, similar to the prior application because of again, I just used the term drastic because it seemed to be, or extreme, whatever adjective is appropriate. We would recommend participation in this matter as well.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Supervisor Bundy, seconded by Supervisor Grenier to participate in the appeal 23-2005. Any comments by the board? Questions? Any public comment?
Clarification on where this is. I tried to look it up and I couldn't find it. I think it's on Heacock adjacent.
All right, just for the record, Mr. Larry Borda, he is a Lower Makefield resident.
I think it's on a narrow strip that's adjacent to my development on Heacock.
It's opposite Covington Road, I believe, which would back up to your development. I believe that's correct. I believe that's correct. Mr. Grenier, I'm sure. Is
I'm
pulling
looking
up
at the map
as we speak.
as we speak. So it is, of course, dang it. The road map isn't
It would
showing.
be
it.
on the west side of Heacock, or I'm sorry, the east side of Heacock, which again would be, yes.
I think it's the one they periodically put up some sign that's an advertisement for something about buying houses.
Yeah. Do you know where Bluebird Drive is? It's directly across the street from Bluebird Drive.
When you say the township's going to participate, we assume that's the promote a position against that since you described it as drastic?
Well, at a minimum, we want to get the information so we can at least ask the questions to help the zoning hearing board realize we have concerns. Now, they have not taken a position to oppose. That may change depending on what they hear and what's reported back. We do have a liaison at the zoning hearing board, which I believe is Mr. McCartney.
Yes, sir.
So he will certainly report back to us as well if there's, and by the way, I'm sure you know this, The township always retains the right to be a party, no matter what. And so if there's something that happens that required appeal, we would always be able to appeal, but we would participate at a minimum at the level now.
This hearing, the zoning hearing is scheduled for the 15th.
As far as we know right now, yes.
Yes.
And they'll make a recommendation to you folks, and then you folks will make a decision.
No,
They make the decision.
zoning hearing board makes a decision. They're a separate entity. We can be a party to that. And as a result, if the zoning hearing board issues a decision that we think is adverse to what the interest would be, we can always appeal. And or if it issues a decision that's favorable to the denying it, for example, and the applicant appeals, we can still be a party as well on that.
I appreciate that.
Sure.
I mean, the frontage here is 8.5 feet. You can't even
Right.
put a car in that.
Well, I think that was one of the concerns, similar to the prior one, that especially given the nature of that road, it is a collector road, as it indicates, that does create some causes for concern.
Yeah.
Yep.
And not for nothing, noticing that the applicant or the folks making for both A and B are the same. Is that anyone we're familiar with, or is that?
I'm not. Their lawyer is Mike McGinnis is a very good lawyer who does a lot of the applications. I haven't talked to Mr. McGinnis about this. I don't recognize the names at all. Now, there may be other people who are reformed in another entity. I don't know.
Tried to find out who they are. It's weird because they're incorporated in every state in the country.
Oh.
So they're basically setting up LLCs, I guess, to
Right.
promote development.
Yeah.
It wasn't much in terms of who they are, who's members, who the officers are.
Appreciate that.
Any other public comment? I'll call the question. All those in favor of participating in Appeal 23-2005, signify by saying aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it, 5-0.
And finally, under zoning hearing board, item C, appeal number Z-23-2, I think it's probably misprint, 23-2006. Sherry Nunez for the property located at 2009 Woodland Drive, tax parcel 20-037-001-001. Applicant is requesting a variance from Township Zoning Ordinance 200-22 in order to allow the construction of a 16 by 16-foot pergola structure with a 2-foot side yard setback instead of the required 15 feet. I've been advised this apparently will be scheduled, at least for now, for the 15th as well. Given the nature of this request and the zoning hearing board's experience with these situations, we would recommend deferral. But again, if the board decides on something else, they certainly have the authority to do that. Hearing none, that matter we will defer and we will not participate in that matter. Mr. Majewski's not here for community development. Do you want me to handle these next two matters? 11A, again, these are standard in terms of allowing extensions of time for these matters to be considered as part of the subdivision land development process. First would be to consider approval for the grant of the extension of time for 1101 Big Oak Road subdivision to May 17th, 2023, which is our next meeting. I believe that'll be on the agenda that night, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah, if they make a motion, then yes, Mr. Marshall, because I know you live nearby. So.
I hear a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Supervisor Grenier, seconded by Supervisor Lewis to grant an extension for 1101 Big Oaks Road subdivision to May 17th. Any comments by the board? Any public comment? Mr. Marshall?
Can you tell me what is
Hey,
supposed,
Mr.
Doug Marshall, Lower Makefield Township.
Thank you.
Can you tell me what's supposed to happen on the 17th?
Yeah, that's the night that the land development application will come before the board. There'll be obviously engineer and the other reviewing entities will have comments. Public is allowed to make comments about if they have any issues or concerns with the proposal. And there'll be determination that night as to whether the board will approve the subdivision as requested and or modified, depending on what the exchange is that night at the meeting. But it's certainly the public is ready to be there. And I know you're probably within the notification zone, so I'm sure you'll be one of the people who may be there.
One question I have is that I know that the Environmental Advisory Commission, I think Alan Dresser was and has been in charge of that piece of property, recommended that an independent arborist actually view the property, because the arborist that had been obtained by the developer actually proceeded to get two different arborists from the same company. Each of the reports were contradictory, and then Mr. Dresser, at the end of January, wrote a letter saying, we really strongly recommend an independent arborist, somebody who does not have a dog in the fight, so to speak. And I'm wondering, has that happened?
Mr. Pokel indicates that it has.
I believe that it has. I've seen emails. I myself was not in attendance. It actually, so I've seen emails. I believe the meeting is, might not have occurred yet, but it has been
It
scheduled.
hasn't occurred yet. I didn't hear.
It might not have occurred yet, but it has been scheduled.
In other words, the independent arborist has been scheduled.
Correct.
Right. And who would have retained that person?
Township.
Okay, great. Would it be fair to say that you would wait for that report before you'd make a final determination?
And that was part of the reason for the delay in rendering a decision on the application to begin with. Yes.
Can I get a copy of that report when it comes in?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I can contact you.
Yeah, we may require you to submit a right to know law request, but yes, you would be entitled to
What, I'm sorry?
a right to know law request, but yes, that's not a onerous process, but yes.
I'll submit that request to the chair and
You would submit it to me. Yeah, on the right, yeah.
Mr. Kratzer. Okay.
Mr. Marshall. Yeah.
Okay.
To his point, to Mr. Marshall's point, I'm wondering, I don't believe that, will the EAC receive a copy of that to look at? Because they had some great comments in the last one. Because I will personally, as someone who reviews these on a daily basis, it would, as he was saying, that arborist report or those arborist reports are rather laughable. They were claiming every tree on that site was dead or was a potential hazard because they might someday fall on a new house that might be built. It was ridiculous. So I understand what you're asking. So I want to make sure that whatever we get to see is reasonable and legitimate, so we don't have to have that type of conversation.
And I know that look, I'm just a layperson and nobody up here is a specialist, but it would, when I do live again adjacent to that property, and I can tell you that based on what I know about the property, the vast majority of trees are along the Elbow Lane property, a street. So when I see the proposals, I just have a difficult time believing that it doesn't exceed the 25% ceiling. And in order for you to make a reasonable determination as to whether or not that in fact is the case, or whether it's underneath that ceiling, am I not correct that you would need to determine the number of trees that are on that property, or at least the number of healthy trees on that property, and then the number that are going to be knocked down? So you'd have the denominator and the nominator, that would give us that percentage. But without that number, because I will tell you again, I mean, you can go to Google Earth and make your own determination, but if you drive by there, you'll see the majority of that land is an open field. And the vast majority of the trees, and now that the spring is here, you can see the greenery, and I can't tell you there's certainly some dead trees, is along Elbow Lane. And there's just no way that in my mind, does not exceed the 25%. So that's why I want an independent arborist. I think it's essential that we get that, and I'll put the R2K in, and we'll go from there.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Bundy's going to sign off at this point.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall.
Mr. Chair, I was just wondering from a contingency perspective, in the off chance the arborist stuff isn't done by May 17th, would the developer and or anyone else mind if we just pushed it to June 30th, that they get there by May 17th?
We can postpone again.
I mean, the applicant would have to grant you that.
They're the ones that
extension,
have to tell us.
So-
I would love that, but I don't know that.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
but just, and I.
Yeah, I'm
I
just
agree with
giving
you.
the
I ju-
offer, yeah.
It's just, and that will you know, if we don't get the report,
Yeah, yeah.
we can deal with it, but not only the EAC was very concerned about this issue, but the planning commission was also very concerned about this issue. If I remember correctly, as the liaison for the planning commission, the developer is more than willing to, to abide by the township's wishes with the planting of trees and the continuing.
And I believe on this, because I think there's an arborist also involved in the next project as well, which, and so I believe this arborist report has been completed and received. I did just receive something from Dan McClone. So, so that site visit, I think, occurred and there is a report. So,
We haven't seen it yet, but when we see it, I'm sure you'll see it shortly.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Okay, any other public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the extension for 1101 Big Oak, signify by saying aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Ayes have it 4-0.
And the next one is a similar item, as Mr. Kratzer's indicated, is to consider the acceptance of an extension of time for 1566 Yardley Newtown Road subdivision to June 30th, 2023.
Do I hear a motion?
Moved.
Second.
Motion made by Supervisor Grenier, seconded by Supervisor Lewis. Extend time for 1566 subdivision. Any comments by the board? Questions by the board? Any public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the extension signify by saying aye. Raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it 4-0. Go to item 12, supervisor reports. I have nothing to report. Ms. Blundy is absent. Mr. Lewis?
Oh, boy, I have a mega report, mainly because I was at the PSATS conference in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and a lovely time. And I still have some parting gifts if anybody in the audience wants some. But I learned a whole bunch of stuff, talked to a number of different state agencies. One quick thing I'd like to bring to people's attention is I am the liaison to the Disability Advisory Board. Pennsylvania has a program called PA Able, which gives you a tax-deferred savings vehicle for those who have a disability or caring for one. And it can be a very effective savings tool and allow you to reduce your tax burden if you're caring for somebody. There's some really unique eligibility requirements that make it very accessible for people. I find that, occasionally there's a lot of government programs people don't know about. This is one that I think people, many in the community can take advantage of. For example, in terms of eligibility, the onset of the disability is anytime prior to age 26. So it's something to look at. And if you just go to paable.gov, you can learn more about it. And I know most people that are either have a disability or care for those don't often think to be the best advocate or look for every possible program available. And that's why I want to bring that to your attention. So if you haven't taken a look at that, look at paable.gov. In terms of other folks, the Farmland Preservation Commission met, I think it was before last meeting. Historical Commission I've talked about significantly, and that's all I have.
Thanks. Mr. McCartney?
The zoning hearing board met last night and gave a continuance to the cell phone tower hearing for August 1st. And that's all I had to report.
Thank you. Mr. Grenier?
I have a couple. Citizens Traffic Commission, they've been working with Mr. Kratzer and Mr. Fiacco, Safe Engineering, to they've raised some concerns about timing of the light at Stony Hill Road and Big Oak Road, and it sounds like that is being addressed through some permitting issues, et cetera. So thank you, Mr. Kratzer, for working with them. They appreciate it. The EAC held their styrofoam recycling event on April 22nd, I believe. They gather. If you were here, you could see just how much styrofoam they packed into these back rooms. It was a great job. I didn't have any styrofoam to give them, but I stopped by to say hi, and they were happy about it. The Trenton Mercer Citizens Airport Review Board. That one I actually have a request from them. They passed a motion to advise the board or request that the board write a letter to Secretary Buttigieg. He apparently has recently visited the Trenton Mercer Airport. And as we all know, we're party to a lawsuit related to that. We're petitioner, I believe, is what we are. And apparently, Congressman Fitzpatrick and potentially Senators Saniciero and Representative Perry Warren will be writing letters to the Secretary advising him of the current situation relative to the EA and all the reviews that we have talked about so much. So they have asked that we consider writing a similar letter to the Secretary as he is in charge of funding or makes recommendations for funding, I should say, for a lot of these things. Moving forward with another option of potentially teaming with one of our other representatives to sign on to their letter. As a petitioner, Mr. Chulov, I don't know how that affects our status, if that matters at all, but
That won't affect, our ability as a litigant, so,
they did provide some language from different members of the group, which it may or may not be to the board's liking or of this similar to the language we might use as we've written letters in the past. But if the board is so inclined to do so, we can look to draft something similar that gets our point across.
Is there consensus from the board to address such a letter?
I'd be up for that. I mean, it's certainly worth bringing to Secretary Buttigieg our concerns and the issues that we face related to the airport.
Yeah, I would be okay with that.
Well, let's work with our liaison and we'll get a letter.
All right. I'll pass it back to him and see what we can get done.
Great. Okay.
And if Supervisor Lewis, you were an excellent letter writer, so if any interest in doing this.
However, and now I'm going to call him out because he has not responded to my detailed letter. New Jersey DEP Commissioner Sean LaTourette, you know who you are. We're LinkedIn buddies, and it's been over 6 months and you haven't answered my letter. Now, come on. I know you're out there. I'll remind him tomorrow.
Item 13, other business. Item 14, appointments, boards and commissions, reappointments.
Did you want to do?
The appointment and then the three.
If you'd like, yeah. Mr. Chair, I move that we reappoint Mr. James Richardson to the Golf Committee.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for reappointing
Mr. James Richardson.
to the Golf Committee. Any comment? Public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Let's have it 4-0.
And Mr. Chair, I move that we appoint Mr. Jeffrey Bedser, Ms. Kathy Hanville, and Mr. Jim Sachs as alternates to the Historical Commission.
Second. We have a motion and a second to appoint three alternate members of the Historical Commission. Any comments? Public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye and raise your hand. Aye.
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 Ayes have it 4-0. General public comment? Any comment online?
There is no comment online at this time.
Come on down.
General open comment, yeah.
Mike Rossi, Lower Makefield Township. Just a few things. First is I do want to request support from the board to oppose the cell phone tower appeal 23-1999 on the basis of the extreme and egregious, whatever terminology you want to use, location 2 homes in the R3M high density single family zone. That monopole will be within 200 feet to 250 feet of homes, structures, not just to a property line. This is to the physical homes that people live in. So my request and my ask is that the board take it up as an agenda item. And I know conflict counsel is being appointed, but my request is similar to the April 6th, 2022 meeting in which this same Board of Supervisors, on recommendation by Solicitor Truelove, to recommend the variance not be approved for Brookside because of the R3M residential zone and the ability to locate that cell tower in either commercial or in telecommunication overlay zones that is part of the Planning Commission and the Zoning Board allowances for those telecommunication towers. If you are in the parking lot of 375 Stony Hill Road, you will get 2 to 3 bars of service on a Verizon cell phone. You will also get 2 to 3 bars of service on an AT&T cell phone, both of which we checked. So when we talk about a dead zone or the need to place it there, I would like to ask Mr. Kratzner what document you're citing from the record earlier today that a cell phone tower in 5 Mile Woods would not alleviate that zone and understanding that it may not be eligible to go in 5 Mile Woods, but that's 4/10 of a mile from 375 Stony Hill to 5 Mile Woods. So, and do we know, what document was stated or what study, what information you have to say that wouldn't cover what they're looking to do? And
again, I'm not an expert on this. My statement was based on meeting with the applicant and folks to try to discuss the potential relocation of the proposed tower in relation to homes. And so part of the reason for the delay is not only because of the conflict counsel issue that you raised, but also Verizon looking at an alternative location on that site that enhances the separation between the proposed tower and the adjacent residences. So the coverage gap information was what was conveyed to us. Again, in all candor, I'm not an expert on that. I'm not a cellular communication engineer or anything of that nature. This is information that was conveyed to me as part of the applicant, from the applicant. So again, that's part of their burden. They'll have to present that issue to the extent that that's an issue that they're claiming. But that alternative locations were discussed, and it was just a general conversation about township-owned property and the potential of locating those on other perhaps better sites or whatever adjective you want to use in that regard. But ultimately, that's something that they'll have to present and before the zoning hearing board.
I would ask that we clarify then that earlier statement that is information coming from the applicant who has a commercial vested interest in putting a commercial cell phone tower that to be revenue generating for Cellco and for the landowner. As far as relocating it within that property, I would strongly oppose that as well and ask the Board of Supervisors to support the neighbors in not creating a situation where we are getting closer to other homes. That is the highest density single family residence we have. And Mr. Lewis, I know you've sent a return email to me based on something I sent showing a picture of a cell tower off your front porch. Is that cell tower in a telecommunication zone?
It's been there as long as I've been there. So I believe it's on, I don't know if it's farmland preservation property. Yeah.
That was built before the overlay zone, I think, was created.
Yeah. And respectfully,
I think.
yeah. And hopefully you got a detailed response to your question. I'm appreciative for that. There are a number of laws at the state level that limit our capacity to do certain things as it relates to cell phone towers. Interestingly, the person who authored many of them is in a neighboring district. He's now State Senator Frank Ferry. There are limits as to what the township can and can't do in this case. And one of the things that we have to navigate is to make sure that we don't engender, unnecessary litigation, and at the same time, respect both community and property owner rights. And that's a difficult balance. But what I would urge folks to understand, this is something, Mr. Borda came up before. The zoning hearing board is an independent quasi judicial body, right? They're going to be making a decision on whether there's a variance here or not. And we do retain rights thereafter, but it's important for us to, I believe the board did vote to participate in this case, but there's limits as to what we can and can't do. So
We didn't vote to participate yet. We voted to.
we voted to.
We were considering that the last
Right,
time, and then
but
when the conflict council
Because
issue arose,
we have
that
to
was
get
kind of
conflict
put on the
counsel,
side, so that's
we have to
still-
talk to
still an open
conflict
issue.
counsel. It's premature for us to, and believe me, we hear both sides. And, one of the difficult decisions a board has to make is to weigh the total needs of the community, with total needs of the homeowner, total needs of the property owner, where the cell tower may go, and the Telecommunications Act. So for this group of volunteers, basically, who have to make the zoning hearing board and us to whether we're going to participate, continue to defer or oppose. Well, there's a lot of balls, up in the air right now. When we're ready to make a decision, please be here and make your comments known.
I will be here often and loud and frequent. And just as a point of clarification, all I'm asking for is the same support that was given when the Board of Supervisors opposed the Brookside. Laws are the same. Telecommunication Act is 27 years old. So when we look at it as 1996, I believe. So at the end of the day, nothing has changed in the 12 months since Solicitor Truelove's recommendation to push it to the zones in our zoning plan where it belongs. The second component to that will be an ask at some point of who would be party to litigation for diminished value based on the acceptance of a commercial operation placed in the R3 zone.
You understand? Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Tony Manarino. I live on Stony Hill Road. I have probably the longest property line with the synagogue. So I'm a physician. My objections are safety and health. And I know I can't bring those up according to section 704, paragraph 4 of this act from 1996, which doesn't state health, by the way. It states environmental. They never intended to mean health, but it's been interpreted as such, but that's fine. I just want to make everyone aware, and I'm sure most of you are aware, that the FCC is now, I don't know if the right word is in contempt of a circuit court order to go back and review their safety findings from 1996 by the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. August the 13th of 21, the DC Circuit found the FCC to be arbitrary and capricious, ordered them to go back and review their safety protocol. They've not done so. They're supposed to actually do it according to this law that we always quote every 2 years, every even numbered year, and they don't. The last time they've checked any of their ratings, as far as I know, was 1999. Think back for a minute, 1999 or 1996. What kind of car were you driving? What did your computer monitor look like? What did your cell phone look like? And yet we're using those laws. If you look at what the FCC rule is, for just one parameter, 1800 megahertz is a very commonly used cell phone wave length. The density profile allowed by the FCC in watts per meter squared is 10. It's just a number. Doesn't mean much to me. I'm a doctor, I'm not an engineer. But just to look at that number compared to other countries that don't have this type of arbitrary restriction on it. Australia is 2. Israel is 1. Italy is 1. New Zealand is 0.5. China is 0.4. We're at 10. Russia is 0.2. France, Switzerland, 0.1. Germany, 0.9. Switzerland, 0.1. 0.01. Right? So we are magnitudes out of control in this country because the FCC refuses to revise their safety profile. So before we agree to build a cell phone tower, whether it is allowed under some variants, which I've read this act more than once, let's make sure that we don't agree to establish a cell phone tower that is already in violation of a court order from a federal circuit court. Right? And I'll be back too. And I know there's a general comment period. And what I'd like to do is what I really enjoy, right, is to discuss the detrimental effects of things like this, because I've worked with non-ionizing radiation for 40 years. And I do understand a lot of it. And I'll be back with Mike and everybody else.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Tom Meyer. I live on Twig Lane behind Bethel. Several thousand years ago, we had a Roman statesman who expressed his displeasure of certain matters every time he could. Consider me a 21st century Cato the Elder. And to tell you that building an 18-story tower in a residential area is really a very bad idea. Thank you.
Hello, Pareen Desai again. Thank you so much for your time. I just wanted to let you know that we have.
Just for the record, saying, you are.
I'm also on Twig Lane. I'm neighbors with many of the people here, talking about the cell phone tower. I do want to make you aware that we have a change.org petition up online. You're free to view it at your leisure. There are currently 287 signatories to that change.org petition. So when you think about the community and you think about the number of people who are generally opposed to putting it in a residential neighborhood, listen, we all get that there are potential cell phone gaps. Frankly, I have T-Mobile, and in the parking lot of Bethel, I have no problems whatsoever. But so I think you've heard now 3 different cell phone carriers where we do not have problems in this area. But that said, there are 287 people who agree that we do not want a cell phone tower built in our backyards. So if there's a way to put it somewhere else, we would very much appreciate your help and time in thinking that through with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
George Fox, Stony Hill Road. Just want to say that I oppose it as well. I know Lower Makefield is a great place to live. Let's keep it that way. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Any public comment online? Oh.
There's no public comment online.
Hi, my name's Corinne Ross. I live on Twig Lane as well. And I just want to say that we've been driving around and looking at other cell phone towers, and you notice a lot more when you're paying attention to them. And there's 4 of them, like very close, like in like the zones where they're supposed to be. And we'll go to different ones. And sometimes we have AT&T, we'll have like all bars, or we'll have like less bars. So obviously they're not being utilized as they could be. And another thing is, we moved here about 10 years ago, and this area was just such a pretty area to be near. You know, it's convenient, you're a big city, you have all the highways. And when I saw that helium balloon go up there, having something not only just for the property owners that border that, but for the whole area. Like, you get off the highway, think, oh, it's a nice, beautiful town in the suburbs, and you have this huge thing that they're going to make look like a tree. It's more than double the height of anything else in the area. And I just think it would be detrimental not only to the local, very close properties that border it, but to the area in general. And I'm sure a lot of you live near there too and don't really want to have to deal with looking at that. And also, especially if you have like little children with developmental, the possible effects it could have on them. I mean, I know it's not something that we could really bring up to the zoning board, but it's something definitely to consider. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Paul Olear, also township resident. I've been a resident here since 1974. Actually used to work here. I feel compelled to straighten up chairs when I leave. I say that from the standpoint of we all get evolution of a township and an area. I've seen a lot, and some of it's been really good, and some of that's debatable. What I struggle with is, kind of getting back to the initial point that Mike had made, which is how the heck is it allowable for a corporation to drop a 150-foot tower in an R3 zone? There is a significant concentration of houses there. And we're not going to debate laws or fix laws. I understand that, but I would appreciate the consistency of the support of the board. I don't understand what's changed since April of last year to this year. So as it comes time to consider your position, it would be greatly appreciated if we had your support. I understand it is different than the zoning board, but I'm sure you all carry a lot of weight with them. So, thank you.
Any additional public comment? Hearing none, I will ask for other business one more time. Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.